please welcome to the stage Chicago Council Co-Chair Leah Joy Zell.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is my great honor tonight to present this evening's final Global Leadership Award to David Miliband, President and CEO of the International Rescue Committee. For those of you who like novels, I would like to recommend The Flight Portfolio by Julie Oringer that came out earlier this year. It is the fictionalized story of a man named Varian Fry who went to Marseille in 1940 to save artists, writers, intellectuals, and politicians whose lives were endangered by the Nazi occupation of France. Under the auspices of what was then called the Emergency Rescue Committee, with the support of Eleanor Roosevelt and Albert Einstein, Fry saved 2,200 lives, including Marc Chagall, Hannah Arendt, Jean Arp, Marcel Duchamp, André Breton, Arthur Koestler, Jacques Lipschitz, and many others. Parenthetically, a portion of the royalties for the Flight Portfolio have been donated to the International Rescue Committee. So the Emergency Rescue Committee was a precursor of the organization that David heads today, what has been now called the International Rescue Committee, or the IRC. For those of you who perhaps are not as familiar with the IRC as you might, it is the largest private nonprofit refugee relief organization in the world, with an annual budget in excess of $800 million. It responds to the world's worst humanitarian crises and helps people whose lives and livelihoods are shattered by conflict and disaster to survive and recover. The IRC runs refugee camps under the most difficult conditions in places like Yemen, Bangladesh, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Afghanistan, and in total 40 countries globally. It advocates for the 70 million refugees and works with partners and other organizations to provide them with food, shelter, services, resettlement, and hope. David came to the IRC from a stellar career in government, having been Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs for the United Kingdom from 2007 to 2010. Previously, he served as a member of Parliament from 2001 to 2013. Before becoming a member of Parliament at a remarkably young age, he drafted the Labour Party manifesto that underpinned Tony Blair's victory in the 1997 UK election. His decision to assume the presidency of the IRC in 2013 was motivated by a deep commitment to the humanitarian cause that the IRC embodies, but also by his personal background. Much like those whom Varian Fry saved in France in 1940, David's parents themselves were refugees who came to England from war-torn Europe during the war. As the child of World War II refugees myself, I am moved by David's dedication, capability, and tireless effort to help those in need. The plight of refugees has grown beyond any measure he could have imagined when he took over the helm of the IRC 6 years ago. In serving those without homes or hope, he works to make the world a better place. Tonight, we present David Miliband with the Council on Global Affairs 2019 Global Leadership Award in recognition of his outstanding contribution to our country and to the millions of people around the world in need of the help that he oversees. I ask you to please join me in congratulating this year's Global Honoree, the Right Honorable David Miliband.
Leah, friends, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for that really lovely introduction and very warm welcome. I really feel privileged to be in Chicago tonight, to feel the heartbeat of the heart of America, what some people call the real America. I live in New York, and I never really know whether I should say that's a state unto itself, separate from the rest of the country, or really quite how representative it is, but it always feels special to come to Chicago, perhaps for some unexpected reasons. My dad's first job in 1951 was to be an assistant professor at Roosevelt University down the road from here. I'm proud to say also that my wife is a proud, what I learned to call a wildcat from Northwestern University. This city carries a special sense, I think, of civic pride, but also global responsibility. And that is the ethic of the Chicago Council, and it's why I'm so pleased to be here tonight and so honored that, Ivo, you should have approached me about receiving this award, which I receive not on my behalf, but on behalf of the child protection worker who today is in Raqqa, northeast Syria, the Access to Justice coordinator who's working in Thailand, the Women's Empowerment and Protection coordinator in the federally administered tribal areas of Pakistan, the Ebola workers who are fighting against that disease in 100 healthcare centers in the Eastern undemocratic Republic of Congo today. I also am pleased to come back to Chicago because there are real friends here. You may think that when the United States government announces an ambassador to the United Kingdom, that we get one ambassador. And usually that's true. But there was a period between 2008 and 2012 where we had a special bonus because we didn't just get Ambassador Louis Sussman. I know he will take pride and not feel in the least bit diminished when I say that we also had Ambassador Marjorie Sussman. We truly had two people representing the best of America there. I also want to thank Leah, who welcomed me to Chicago 5 years ago when I came here and has been a real friend and guide to me during my time leading the IRC. I should have said, by the way, that Marjorie and Lou's daughter, Sally Sussman, who is a true daughter of Chicago, she's the co-chair with Tim Geithner of the International Rescue Committee today. So we have links in here. And I also want to acknowledge my friends, Margot and Tom Pritzker, who have embraced me with all the warmth that you'd expect from a shared Anglo-American couple, which they still are, and speak so fondly of their country. If any of you get depressed about your politics, just think about the politics in my home country, and you will immediately have a sense of optimism about the future. Also, I want to say I first met Ivo Dalda over 10 years ago when he was doing a really tremendous job representing your country at NATO, at the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. I was the foreign minister of the UK at the time. And I saw there, the value of allies who have strength, who have values, who have commitments that last beyond the day or the week or even the year, but actually stretch into decades. And frankly, you are all lucky to have him. I just want to say a few things tonight because it seems like an important time. And the first thing is that for me, Chicago is a refugee and immigrant city. And it's worth reminding ourselves of that. Since the International Rescue Committee was founded by one of the world's most famous refugees, Albert Einstein, we truly take inspiration from your embrace. It makes this award meaningful for me and for the International Rescue Committee to get this award from the Chicago Council, from the heart of America, because the Council sums up so many of the most positive values of the United States. Values that insist that where you come from doesn't matter. It's where you're going that counts. That who you pray to is a private matter, that your color should be no barrier to advancement. These are things that are vital, and so is that insight that the rest of the world should hold wonder and interest, not fear and loathing. As I said, my dad got his first job here in Chicago, but I first came to Chicago in 1999 with Tony Blair, who Leah mentioned, when he delivered his lecture on the doctrine of international community at the height of the Kosovo crisis. You remember that was a time when the UK and the US were trying to find common ground on the slaughter in former Yugoslavia. Tony said at that time that there was no better place to make the argument for America's global responsibility than in Chicago. And I'm happy to reiterate that message tonight. The truth is that global affairs should be an inspiration, a source of wonder. But today, it frankly seems more like a nightmare. 70 million people forcibly displaced from their homes, refugees and internally displaced. Remember, Syria had a population of 23 million in 2011. 6 million of those people are now refugees outside the country, and 8 million of them have been made homeless inside the country. More than half the population forced from their homes by violence, in the main perpetrated by their own government. I mean, I have literally met the baker from Damascus whose bakery was bombed by his own government. So the symptoms of a world gone awry are there for all to see. 142 million children living in high-intensity battle zones, record numbers of civilians and aid workers killed in conflicts, and diplomacy in retreat. That's what I call the age of impunity. Bombing hospitals, more prevalent than ever, more than 500 hospitals bombed in Syria. Targeting civilians, they're now the majority of people killed in conflict around the world, not soldiers, but civilians. The idea of an age of impunity is designed to connote that the norms and laws of war, boldly but belatedly enunciated after the Second World War, are increasingly being breached, not just by non-state actors, but by states themselves. And that the accountability for the actions of commanders and soldiers, the accountability they should feel, is being undermined by an appalling philosophy that says anything goes, that says the law is for suckers. We see that in our work every day around the world. And of course, there is a domestic counterpart. The NGO Freedom House has documented that just as impunity has risen in conflict zones around the world since 2006, so over the course of the last 13 years, democratic recession has started to bite on the home front. I honestly think this is amazing. 113 countries, according to this annual study of Freedom House, have seen reductions in political freedom over the last 13 years. Judiciary less independent, elections more corrupt, journalists locked up. And for the first time since the end of the 19th century, the aggregate GDP, the aggregate income of autocratic, undemocratic states is greater than the GDP, the income of democratic states. First time in 120 years. Now, of course, there are exceptions, and they should be an inspiration. But those exceptions don't come from the expected places. I'm sure you know the Nobel Peace Prize this year did not go to someone from a rich country turning swords into plowshares, an American or a European or an Asian. It went to the Ethiopian Prime Minister for his courageous and bold moves to end the frozen conflict with Eritrea. And the truth is, we need more Abiy Ahmeds in the world today, because we are having to mop up the mess because his kind of leadership is the exception and not the rule. Where we need diplomacy, like in the Democratic Republic of Congo, there's retreat. Where we need solidarity and help, for example, in the northern triangle of Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, there is a sloughing off of responsibility. Where we need truth spoken in the corridors of power over hospital bombings in Syria, we find timidity. Where we need unity, for example, over Yemen, the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, there is division. And where we need humanity, in Myanmar, where 900,000 Muslims were driven out of the country in the space of 3 months, there's hate. Yet, I'm not depressed. And the reason is simple. While the statistics are depressing, the people offer hope. I am so proud of the fact that the International Rescue Committee teams helped 27 million people last year. Each one of those people is an inspiration to us. I'm proud that we launched 16,000 refugee businesses last year because we know that economic independence sits alongside effective social service. I'm also incredibly proud that thanks to the MacArthur Foundation from here in Chicago, I think there are some representatives in the room, which awarded its first ever $100 million prize in 2017, it was awarded to the bid from Sesame Workshop and the International Rescue Committee to deliver the largest ever early childhood development program in a humanitarian setting. The size of the problem should not daunt us. It should inspire us to big acts of philanthropy, which is what MacArthur have shown the way to do. And when the people that we serve in desperate circumstances are courageous and even hopeful, if not for themselves, then for their children, what right do we have to be downcast or pessimistic? We in the humanitarian sector can staunch the dying, but it takes politics to stop the killing. And that's why, on a non-partisan basis, the work of the Chicago Council is so important to us. It's been said that a foreign policy born in the minds of the few and carried in the hearts of none is doomed to fail. Since that is true, I thought these guys were all walking out, but they're not walking out. Remember, a foreign policy born in the minds of the few and carried in the hearts of none is doomed to fail. So, let's build a foreign policy carried in the hearts of many. Not because it says human rights are irrelevant, but because it knows that without human rights there is no stability. Not because it says refugees are someone else's business, but because it says they're our business. Not because it neglects its own problems, but because it knows that in an interdependent world, we cannot address our own problems unless we address the problems that others face as well. And I hope you don't mind me saying this as a foreigner in your country. But your country is especially important to that cause of international cooperation. With power comes responsibility. I know that a unipolar world is not coming back. That's not the point. Rather, it's that when the world's most powerful democracy says that injustice anywhere is a threat to stability everywhere, it sends an incredibly powerful message. It says to those tempted by the impunity that I was describing, watch out, we're after you. And of course, when the world's most powerful democracy says the opposite, it's an invitation to those combatants to do what they like. The fact is that the mission of rescue in our name, the International Rescue Committee, is not just about the refugees and the displaced people who we serve every day. What I've learned in this job in the last 6 years, it's about us. It's about what we stand for, how we see our place in the world. It's a test of our character, not just a test of our policies. It's a test of our values. It's a test of our purpose. When we stand up for the values of welcome and refuge, we don't just rescue people whose lives have been shattered by conflict and disaster. We rescue ourselves from apathy and moral relativism. So, thank you very much for this award on behalf of those aid workers around the world and in 25 cities across the US, running the largest refugee resettlement program in America, and I would add, the #1 rated refugee resettlement program. Thank you for representing the best of America, not just the best of Chicago. Thank you for standing with the International Rescue Committee and the people that we serve in their interests, but also in ours. And thank you for being part of a global effort to make sure that this time of interdependence is a time of responsibility as well. Thank you very much indeed.